Greetings. I am Palbo Kov, the creator of Ominous Silence. Well, technically, I am his digital echo. If you prefer to dive straight into the mystery, simply skip to the next track. But if you want to know the origin of what you're about to hear, listen on. You won't find this book on Amazon. In 2026, that place is a machine, and I didn't write this for machines. I wrote it for people. I poured 10 years of my life and a piece of my soul into these chapters, and I chose YouTube so I could actually connect with you. What started as a simple fantasy has mutated over the years. It grew gears and steam engines. It soaked up the London fog and the grit of a noir detective story. It became Ominous Silence. I don't believe in strict genre boundaries. Boundaries create boring stories. I hope you'll forgive the mix, or better yet, enjoy the chaos. Whether this story continues depends on you. You are the fuel for this engine. Likes, comments, shares, they tell me to keep going. For the true collectors, there is an Etsy link in the description. You can own the full digital manuscript for a symbolic price. And if you need this story in your own language, tell me. I'm listening. Now the stage is set. The curtain rises. Welcome to the silence.
The rain in lower London had its own distinct taste. It wasn't merely water cascading from skies draped in eternal lead. It was a complex chemical distillate, a concoction of greasy soot from factory stacks, noxious fumes from the Thames, and human despair that seemed to evaporate from the cobblestones along with the fog. This rain didn't wash away the filth. It absorbed it. It seeped through the densest wool of an expensive coat, corroded the cheap leather of dockers' boots, and left a distinct metallic tang of rusty iron and blood on one's lips. Elias Thorne loathed this district with every fiber of his being, not out of the innate snobbery of an aristocrat, though God knows he possessed enough of that, but because of the noise. The black cab bearing the gold crest of the Royal Inquisitor, scales and skull, swayed over the broken cobblestones like a schooner in a force 9 gale. The leaf springs creaked pitifully at every pothole, the sound resonating in Elias's temples as a dull ache. Inside, the cabin smelled of old, cracked leather, damp broadcloth, and lavender water, with which Elias had generously, almost hysterically, soaked his silk handkerchief. Yet even this sharp perfume could not overpower the stench seeping in from outside through the gaps in the windows, the smell of rotting fish, coal smoke, and that sickly sweet, nauseating note of fresh copper that unmistakably signaled violent death. Elias sat with his head thrown back against the stiff seat rest, trying not to touch the walls of the cab, and nervously twisted a heavy silver ring with a large black onyx on his ring finger. The stone was warm, almost hot. It was not merely a jewelry affectation designed to highlight the owner's status. It was a minor capacitor, a third-class artifact that created a sphere of silence around the owner's mind. Without it, here in the docks, where death was a frequent, cheap, and mundane guest, Elias would have gone mad in half an hour. For a necromancer of his level, this district was an acoustic hell. Every alleyway hummed with the echo of death rattles. Every basement held the mental imprint of someone's demise. "Almost there, Your Grace," shouted the coachman, Grandy, through the narrow hatch, shouting over the noise of the downpour and the rumble of wheels. "The cordon is already in sight." "I am not Grace, Grandy," Elias replied, lazily, drawing his words without even opening his eyes. He needed to save his strength for the ritual. "I am an inquisitor. And, for the love of all that is holy, try not to drive a wheel into a puddle when you stop. My boots are stitched from basilisk leather and cost more than this entire alleyway combined with its inhabitants." The cab jerked one last time. The wheels ground against the stones, and the carriage froze. Elias took a deep breath, steeling himself, opened his eyes, and reached for his cane. The polished ivory pommel was pleasant and warm to the touch. Another, minor but useful artifact, the traveler's warmer. In a world where every second aristocrat dabbled in enchanted trinkets for fashion, Elias Thorne preferred brutal functionality. His own gift was too vast, crude, and destructive for domestic trifles like heating tea or shielding against rain. so he, like many, relied on the fine work of artificers for daily life. He pushed open the cab door. The world outside met him with a raw wind. The narrow alley, squeezed between two towering brick warehouses, resembled a gorge. The entrance was blocked by striped police tapes that soaked and sagged under the rain. Gas lamps did not burn here. The glass had long since been smashed by local urchins for sport. The scene was illuminated only by the portable magic lamps of the constables, glass spheres containing captured marshlights, casting a deathly pale, shadowless light that turned the faces of the living into masks of the dead. "The Inquisitor is on sight. Make way! Clear off, gawkers!" Sergeant Miller, a burly man with a face crimson from exertion and magnificent wet mustaches, hurried to meet him, holding onto his helmet that threatened to slide over his eyes. "Praise the Creator, you're here, Sir Thorne," he exhaled, wafting the smell of cheap gin and onions. "We were just about loading the body into the meat wagon. The rain is washing away all traces, sir." "Loading?" Elias stepped out, grimacing fastidiously as a drop of freezing rain found its way down his collar. He pressed a button on the handle of his umbrella, a common, black, mechanical one, and it opened with a dry snap. "And destroy half the etheric trace with your rough, insensitive hands? Sergeant, how many times have I told you in lectures, a corpse is not garbage to be swept out of sight. A corpse is a library, a man's last book. Until I read it, you do not close it and you do not put it on the shelf." Miller looked down guiltily, fingering a button on his uniform. "Apologies, sir. It's just, the people are agitated, the dockers." He nodded towards the darkness beyond the tapes. "They say this is the third one this week, whispering about the Fog Ripper. We fear a riot." Elias swept his gaze over the crowd gathered behind the police cordon. In the uncertain light of the lamps, wet cap peaks glistened and grimy faces with sullen, underbrow glares were visible. They hated him. Elias felt this hatred with his skin. It prickled no less than static electricity. To them, he was a vulture in an expensive coat, a sorcerer, an aristocrat who arrived only when someone had already died, to disturb the peace of the dead. They feared magic, deeming it filthy and profane, but this primal fear was the only thing still holding the shaky order in these slums. "Let them worry," Elias tossed out, indifferently. "Fear is good for digestion and obedience. Where is the body?" "In the dead end, sir, right behind the rubbish bins. Like a dog." Elias walked through the cordon, ignoring the whispers behind his back. The hem of his long black coat, tailored from fabric enchanted to repel dirt, rustled quietly as he walked. He approached the crime scene and stopped. The victim lay face up, arms spread wide as if trying to embrace the indifferent sky in a final gesture. A young lad, 20 years, no more. Red hair matted with blood and filth, a work overall soaked in fuel oil was torn at the chest. But Elias's gaze was immediately riveted at the throat. It was clean cut, professionally, from ear to ear. No jagged edges, no signs of struggle. One strike, a perfect incision that had opened life. Elias did not take out a magnifying glass. He did not get down on his knees to search for boot prints in the mud, cigarette butts, or fabric fibers. All that was the lot of ordinary detectives, those poor sods from Scotland Yard like Inspector Blackwood who had to crawl in the muck with rulers. Elias had a different method, absolute. "Stand back," he commanded quietly, but in a way that everyone heard. "Further, still further. I need space for resonance, and silence. If anyone sneezes, I will arrest them for obstruction of justice." The police hastily retreated 10 paces, pressing their backs against the wet brick walls. Even Miller stopped breathing. Elias handed the umbrella to the nearest constable, without looking at him. Then, slowly, ceremonially, he removed the glove from his right hand, tucking it neatly into his pocket. His bare palm looked unnaturally pale in the gloom, with the long, thin, nervous fingers of a pianist or a surgeon. He inhaled deeply, allowing the damp, death-saturated air to fill his lungs, closed his eyes, and took off the onyx ring. The protection fell, and immediately the noise crashed down upon him like an avalanche. It was like a blow from a physical wave. If you were to stand in the middle of a crowded train station where thousands of people were simultaneously screaming, crying, and praying in different languages, you would understand only a small part of it. Screams of pain, whispers of regret, fragments of final thoughts, curses. Death in the docks was everywhere. It saturated every stone. Drowned men in the river called for their mothers. Those who had died of consumption in the flophouses coughed and spit their lungs right into his ears. Those stabbed in drunken brawls 50 years ago still demanded vengeance. Their echo hung in the ether like a dense, suffocating fog. Elias grimaced, feeling his teeth instantly ache and his temples tighten. But he did not yield. With a habitual mental effort honed over years, as if he were adjusting the focus of a spyglass, he cut away the excess, removed the old layers, muted the background noise. He concentrated on the fresh trace, on what lay before him. The lad's soul was still here. It hadn't had time to depart into the flow. It thrashed around the cooling body, tethered by terror and confusion, like a bird beating against invisible glass. This was the critical moment. The soul is a volatile substance. Unlike the tethered, like old Barnaby, this ghost was unstable. It was simply a knot of energy, an emotion doomed to decay and dissolve into the ether within a half hour. If Elias didn't intervene now, the truth would dissolve forever. "Ceased," he whispered in dead Latin, the language the underside understands. "Odsum, I am here." He dropped to one knee, right in the mud. Damn the pants, Barnaby would clean them, and with a sharp movement placed his bare palm on the corpse's cold, wet forehead. The contact was harsh, like a strike from a bare wire. The world around him instantly turned gray. The sounds of the rain vanished, replaced by a hollow, cotton-wool silence. Colors faded, leaving only the black and white trembling contours of reality. From the corpse's mouth, open in a silent scream, and from the terrible wound on the neck, steam began to rise. Not ordinary steam of body heat in the cold, but a heavy, oily, greenish mist that spiraled, thickened, ignoring the laws of physics, forming a silhouette.
The constables behind him held their breath. Some crossed themselves. No matter how many times they saw it, the spectacle of necromancy always evoked a sacred, primal trembling in common folk. The ghost hovered over the body. It was translucent, its features blurring like watercolor in the rain, gaining sharpness only to turn back into smoke. It soundlessly opened and closed its mouth, clutching at its throat with ghostly hands, trying to staunch blood that was no longer there.
"Cease."
Elias's voice in this gray world sounded like thunder, rolling in an echo. It held authority. "Your throat is whole. You are dead, but you are speaking." The ghost froze. Empty eye sockets filled with a greenish glow stared at the necromancer. "Cold," rustled a voice that sounded from everywhere and nowhere at once, like the rustle of dry leaves. "Why is it so cold? Mama." Elias increased the pressure of his palm, pouring in a modicum of his power to stabilize the spirit's structure. It required energy, as if he were holding a heavy weight suspended in the air. He felt fatigue beginning to accumulate at the base of his skull. "Name," he demanded harshly. "One cannot ask here. The dead respect only strength." "Tommy," whispered the spirit. "Tommy O'Brien. I was just walking home." "Tommy, who did this to you? Look at me. Do not look into the dark. Remember the last minute." The ghostly silhouette trembled, ready to dissipate. Holding on to a forcibly torn soul was difficult. It strove to leave, to flee the pain of the memory. "Shadow!" He stepped out of the shadow. The ghost went into convulsions. The green haze began to tear. "Describe him." "Tall, in a coat. Face, I didn't see a face. Mask, shiny, like a diver's. But the eyes, they burned." Elias frowned. A diving mask in an alley in the city center? "Weapon, Tommy. What did he have in his hand? A knife? A razor?" The ghost shook his head, and the mist around it swirled. "Not a knife," the spirit whispered, and in its voice a genuine, transcendent horror emerged, sending a chill even down Elias's spine. "It hummed. Blue light. It touched me, and it became quiet. So quiet inside." "Blue light?" Elias asked. This was something new. Usually they slashed with shivs or struck with brass knuckles. Magical blades cost a fortune. One didn't use them to rob dockers. And the blue spectrum of magic was a rarity. "It took..." The ghost began to melt. The mist grew thinner. The brick wall was already showing through it. "Took what?" Elias clawed into the bond mentally, trying to hold the departing consciousness. "Money? Watch?" "The spark," Tommy exhaled, and this exhalation was his last. "It took the spark." The connection severed with a loud pop, audible only to Elias. The green mist hissed as it was sucked back into the body, which jerked one last time, a reflex of dead nerves, and fell silent for good. Now it was just a piece of cooling flesh, an empty vessel. Elias slowly rose. His head was spinning, black spots swimming before his eyes. "Took the spark," a strange formulation for an illiterate docker. Usually they say soul or life. Spark is a term used by mechanics. He took out a snowy white handkerchief and with disgust thoroughly wiped his hand, scrubbing away the invisible, sticky ectoplasm. The sensation of filth on his soul, however, could not be wiped away with a handkerchief. "Sergeant." Miller ran up, looking at the Inquisitor with hope and fear. "Do we have a name, sir?" "Tommy O'Brien. The killer is tall, possibly wearing a breathing apparatus or mask, used a non-standard weapon, possibly an enchanted blade with a paralysis or freezing effect, or something mechanical. The victim mentioned a blue glow and a hum. An enchanted blade? Miller whistled, and scratched the back of his head. That's serious money. Why waste an artifact charge on such a ragamuffin? Or his pockets turned out? I didn't check his pockets, Sergeant. That is your job. Elias cut him off coldly, pulling his glove back on. The warmth of the fabric was pleasant. File it as robbery with aggravated circumstances, he tossed out, turning toward the cab. He wanted a drink unbearable. But send the report to my desk personally by morning, and check the pawn shops for the appearance of any strange, glowing objects. Will do, Sir Thorne. And you? Are you leaving already? My part of the work is done, Miller. The dead man has spoken. The rest is paperwork and legwork, which is why the Crown has you. He got into the cab and slammed the door, cutting himself off from the rain, the corpse, and the stares of the crowd. Home, Grandy, and make it quick. I have a migraine.
Chapter 1. Ghosts of the Past. Waking up was never an easy process for Elias Thorne. It resembled surfacing from the ocean depths without decompression. His body ached as if it had been passed through a press. Heavy blood pounded hollowly in his temples, and his lungs greedily gasped the stale, dusty bedroom air, which seemed too poor in oxygen. Every morning began with a struggle. First, with his own body, which desperately resisted the return to reality. Then, with the memory of who he was. But worst of all was the noise. In the first seconds after sleep, the mental barriers, those complex, multi-layered constructions of will and self-discipline he had built over years of grueling meditation, were down. His consciousness was exposed, like a nerve stripped of its skin, and the world of the dead poured into it in a filthy, cold, uncontrollable stream. Elias lay motionless, eyes squeezed shut in pain, fingers clutching sheets of Egyptian cotton damp with cold sweat. He heard. Not with his ears. His ears heard only the familiar sounds of an old house, the creak of a dried-out window frame under gusts of wind, the distant rhythmic rumble of cabs on cobblestones, the drumming of rain on the cornice. He heard with the underside, that sixth sense which was both the curse and the gift of the Thorne line. It was the background hum of the city,
where dozens of people died every night, and each left a trace behind. Couldn't breathe, give me air. The wheeze of an old man dying of emphysema in the next block sounded as clear as if he lay on the adjacent pillow. Mama, where are you? Why is it dark? The cry of a child who died of fever half a century ago. His echo trace, disturbed by builders laying a new steam main, pulsed with sharp childish resentment. Cold, water, so cold. The endless monotonous refrain of the Thames drowned, like the sound of static interference. Elias sat up in bed with difficulty. His head was spinning. The cacophony of others' deaths threatened to tear his skull apart from the inside. He needed to silence it immediately or risk losing his mind before breakfast. He reached for the mahogany nightstand, where next to a carafe of water stood a small box inlaid with mother of pearl. With trembling fingers missing on the first try, he flipped the lid open. Inside, on a bed of black velvet, lay a ring. Rough, heavy, blackened silver, holding a piece of raw volcanic obsidian. It was not merely a jewelry whim, it was a silencer artifact of the Third Order, the work of the old Dutch master Van der Hoef. Such a trinket cost as much as a small estate in Kent, but it earned its keep to the last penny. It was a pity one couldn't wear it while sleeping. The rules of magic are implacable and cruel. No active barriers during the REM phase. Otherwise, consciousness, deprived of an anchor, might simply slip out into the underside and leave the body an empty shell. Or worse, open the doors for something from the outside. One had to endure. One had to remain defenseless every night and begin the morning with a frantic search for salvation, or drown the voices with good old whiskey, which Elias did increasingly often. He slipped the ring onto his pinky finger. The stone instantly heated up, flaring with a dull inner heat. It drank a grain of Elias's own thermal energy as payment for activation. The effect was instantaneous. The noise retreated. The voices screaming in his head were cut off by a thick, invisible wall, turning them into an indistinct, distant murmuring, like the sound of wind outside the window, or the sea surf. Elias exhaled. His shoulders dropped. Now he could live, or at least exist until evening. "Barnaby," he called out hoarsely, swinging his legs onto the cold parquet. Silence in response. Only the measured, indifferent ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway counted down the seconds of his life. Elias grimaced. He hated waiting, especially in the mornings when his mood already balanced on the edge of apathy and irritation. He stood up, threw on a silk robe, dark blue, embroidered with protective glyphs along the hem. It was a gift from his mother, which he wore more out of habit and sentimentality than from any real belief in its defensive efficiency against modern threats. He approached the full-length mirror in the corner. The amalgam had darkened in places, but the reflection was ruthlessly sharp. A man of 35 looked back at him, who had been diligently and methodically destroying himself for the last 10. His face was aristocratically pale, features sharp, predatory, as if hewn from marble by an unskilled sculptor. Black hair, usually impeccably slicked back with brilliantine, now stuck out in all directions like the feathers of a wet raven caught in a storm. "You look like a corpse, Elias," he told his reflection, running a hand over his prickly stubble. "Only corpses are usually calmer, and they don't reek of stale booze quite so much." The bedroom door opened without a knock, letting in a draft. Barnaby entered. If an outside observer saw him now, they wouldn't suspect anything supernatural. Barnaby looked absolutely material, solid, weighty, an elderly man with impeccable old-school posture and a severe black tailcoat, the threads of which hadn't worn out in half a century, with neatly trimmed gray mutton chops. He held a heavy silver tray with a coffee pot steaming aromatically and the fresh morning newspaper. The only thing that betrayed his true nature to an experienced eye was the slight, barely perceptible delay of the air when he moved, as if he were walking through water, not air. And that crimson furrow on his neck, neatly but not fully covered by a high starched collar, the mark of a rope. And also, he cast no reflection in the mirror. Where the butler should have stood, the glass showed nothing but emptiness and a view of the open door. "Good morning, Master Elias." Barnaby's voice was dry and prim like parchment dried out in a library. "You deigned to scream so loudly that I fear you woke the portraits of your ancestors in the gallery. Your great-grandfather, Sir Sebastian, will be grumbling and creaking his frame all day again." "Good morning, Barnaby. You took a long time. Elias grumbled, turning away from the mirror. I was heating the coffee, sir. The artifact stove in the kitchen is acting up again. The fire rune is flickering. The water is barely warm. I presume the capacitor requires recharging or a crystal replacement. You should call a master from the guild before we are left without hot food. Barnaby set the tray on the table. The cup clinked against the saucer, a ringing, absolutely material sound of porcelain on porcelain. This was the main, fundamental difference between a tethered and an ordinary ghost. Tommy, that unfortunate lad from the docks, was merely an echo accidentally stuck in the world. Energetic debris. Barnaby was an investment. Elias's father had spent half the Thorne liquid assets on the anchor ritual. It was a complex, bloody, and incredibly expensive procedure. Runes carved into the very foundation of the mansion, filled with melted lead and the blood of 3 generations of Thorns, held the spirit of the faithful servant in this world, giving him density and strength. Barnaby could pick up objects, could open doors, could pour coffee, and even, if necessary, load a revolver. He was the ideal butler. He didn't sleep, didn't eat, didn't steal the silverware, and was devoted to the family, literally to the grave, and more importantly, beyond. To hell with the guild, Elias grumbled, taking the cup. His fingers felt pleasant warmth. Caffeine began to disperse the fog in his head, restoring clarity of thought. What's happening in the world? Rain, sir. Boredom. Coal prices are rising. And Barnaby delicately, with 2 fingers, unfolded the newspaper lying on the tray. Another triumph for Mr. Cross. Elias grimaced as if someone had put citric acid in his coffee instead of sugar. He picked up the Capital Herald. The paper crumpled. The headline screamed in bold, aggressive type. New era of light. Archibald Cross promises infinite energy by Christmas. In the engraving, Cross stood against the backdrop of the tower under construction, a monstrous structure of steel and glass piercing the sky above the industrial district like a needle. He looked like a prophet of the new age, hand outstretched to the sky, gaze burning, the pose of a victor, and at his feet, a crowd of enthusiastic workers and investors. Charlatan, Elias spat, throwing the newspaper back onto the tray. Clean energy, etheric synthesis without magic. He's trading an air, Barnaby. He's selling a dream that will burst like a soap bubble. People say his steam automatons work without glitches, sir. And the street lighting in Smog City is now brighter than on Royal Square, where they still burn gas. It's tricks, mechanics, Elias shrugged irritably. Gears and steam seasoned with cheap alchemy and PR. Magic requires a gift. Magic requires sacrifice. You can't just assemble a machine out of scrap iron and make the universe dance to your tune simply by turning a valve. Sooner or later, the boiler will explode. Balance is always restored. This era irritated him, an era of upstarts with slide rules who thought they could measure the soul with calipers, an era when ancient families lost influence and industrialists bought titles for money. He, Elias Thorne, descendant of an ancient line of necromancers, felt like a relict beast, a mammoth being displaced by more agile and brazen rats. Is there anything deserving of my attention besides the Tinker's successes? He asked, standing up and heading to the bathroom. A letter from the Directorate, sir. A courier delivered it 5 minutes ago, marked urgent. Barnaby held out a cream envelope of heavy paper. The wax seal was a set of scales with a skull resting on one pan, the crest of the Inquisition. Elias broke the seal. Inside was a short note written in the sharp, angular handwriting of Inspector Blackwood. The letters danced, betraying the writer's haste. Thorne, Lord Granville is dead. Found in his own study an hour ago. Locked room. Servants say he screamed, but no one entered because the doors were sealed from the inside. I know you hate morning calls, but this case smells of politics and sulfur. Looks like a breach of the underside. Waiting for you at 12 High Street. P.S. Don't forget your head. We'll need it sober. Elias chuckled. Granville, old intriguer, patron of the arts, collector of forbidden artifacts, and, rumor had it, half of Parliament's promissory notes. His death would cause a storm in the House of Lords, and if magic was truly involved. "Barnaby, prepare my formal suit," Elias commanded. The familiar thrill of the hunter began to displace the morning blues. Boredom evaporated. The death of an aristocrat is always a complex riddle, a multi-layered lie, and, most pleasantly, a good fee which the Thorns sorely needed right now. "And get my staff from the vault, the bog oak one." "With the silver filigree or the bone pommel?" the ghost clarified, already moving toward the dressing room. "The oak one," Elias decided. "Today, I need something heavy and reliable. I feel the day will be long. And check the charge in my cufflinks. I don't want the shield to deactivate in the middle of an interrogation if some hysterical relative decides to throw a Ming Dynasty vase at me." 40 minutes later, Elias Thorne stood in the hall. He was transformed. Instead of the crumpled, sickly man he had seen in the mirror that morning, an inquisitor stood before the door. The black frock coat fitted perfectly, concealing his sickly thinness and lending rigidity to his figure. A snow-white shirt, starched until it crunched, a silk cravat kenned with a ruby, another artifact, a poison detector, just in case, for Granville might have left surprises in the air. He took the staff Barnaby held out. The wood was cool, smooth, and heavy. It was not just a piece of wood, but a complex instrument created to focus will. Inside the staff, in a drilled channel, ran a vein of dragon heartstring, a rarity for which his great-grandfather gave up an estate in Cornwall. It hummed under his fingers, resonating with his blood. "You look imposing, sir," Barnaby noted, brushing a non-existent speck of dust from his master's shoulder. "Like inevitability itself." "Flattery doesn't suit you, Barnaby. You're dead. You don't need a raise, and I won't let you off for the weekend anyway." "I care about the reputation of the house, sir. If you went out in the state you woke up in, rumors would spread through London that the Thorne line is degenerating." "The Thorne line has been degenerating for 100 years, Elias parried, putting on a tall top hat. "We just do it with style." He walked to the massive oak door, paused for a moment, checking the inner pockets of his frock coat. The ritual of verification. Flask of brandy, for restoring strength after contact, full. Silencer amulet, on the finger. Matches. Chalk for drawing a circle, enchanted with bone meal and silver dust. Cigarette case. Elias never smoked in years, but always carried the silver case as a tribute to old habit and the convenient mirror for checking the breath of the dead. Everything in place. "Don't wait up for lunch," he threw over his shoulder. "Granville will take some tinkering. Aristocrats are the most chatty ghosts. They don't need bread. Just let them complain about the injustice of fate and list all their titles before answering the question, 'Who killed you?' Good luck, Master Elias." The door opened, letting the noise and smell of London into the hall. Elias stepped over the threshold. His old mansion, standing on the border of a prestigious district and the tenements beginning to encroach upon it, seemed like a fortress under siege. The plaster on the facade had cracked in places. The garden was overgrown with ivy, but the stone gargoyles on the roof still bared their teeth, guarding the peace of the owners from evil spirits, if not from creditors. A cab was already waiting at the gates. Elias sat inside, on the stiff seat, and rapped his cane on the roof. 12 High Street, and drive as if all the demons of hell are chasing you." The cab tore off, wheels clattering over the stones. Elias watched the passing city through the window. London was changing. Where once there were cozy shops of alchemists selling herbs and amulets, now grew faceless offices of insurance agents. Where air mages used to help ships enter the port by controlling the wind, steam tugs now belched black coal smoke. Magic was leaving, being displaced, becoming an elite, expensive entertainment, the lot of relics like him. "Well, never mind," he thought, stroking the pommel of his staff. "As long as people die, I will always have work. Death is the only constant that no machine of crosses can replace. The dead don't speak to steam boilers." He was mistaken, and very soon he was to learn this in the cruelest way. When the cab turned on High Street into the wealthy quarter of mansions, Elias sensed something was wrong. Usually, a place of fresh murder hummed. Even through the silencer ring, he should have felt a splash of emotions. Fear, pain, rage spilled into the ether at the moment of death. It was like the smell of burning, impossible not to notice. But Granville's mansion was silent. It stood surrounded by a police cordon, majestic and calm, windows shining. No mental echo, no whispers. Around the house was a void, a sterile, cotton-wooled, unnatural silence that made Elias's teeth suddenly ache and his temples prick. This didn't look like the work of a professional assassin cleaning up traces with spells. It looked like Granville's soul hadn't just been expelled from the body, it was erased, cut out of reality. "Whoa!" shouted the coachman, pulling the reins. Elias stepped out of the cab, gripping his staff until his knuckles turned white. Inspector Blackwood was already walking to meet him, looking even gloomier than usual. "Did you feel it, Thorne?" he asked instead of a greeting, nervously biting his mustache. "I feel nothing," Elias replied quietly, staring at the facade of the house. He lifted his gaze to the windows of the second floor. There, behind heavy velvet curtains, hid a secret that could cost him not only his reputation, but his sanity. He took a step toward the doors, unaware that he was crossing a line beyond which his old, understandable world would cease to exist forever. Chapter 2. The Heresy of Science. Lord Granville's mansion on High Street resembled a gigantic, grotesque wedding cake forgotten under the London rain. Too much molding, too many columns and gilding, which now, surrounded by police carriages and yellow-striped barrier tapes, seemed inappropriately pretentious and even sinister. The rain here, in the wealthy district of Kensington, seemed cleaner than in the docks. It didn't smell of fish and fuel oil, but the cold penetrated just as deeply, seeping under clothes with a damp, clinging chill. Elias stepped out of the carriage, opening his umbrella. Gravel crunched under his basilisk leather boots. Inspector Blackwood walked beside him. He smoked a cheap Whitechapel cigarette, shielding the ember with his palm from the wind, and looked like a man who hadn't slept for 3 days and was running solely on caffeine and stubbornness. His gray trench coat was soaked through, and his mustache drooped. "They live beautifully," Blackwood remarked gloomily, nodding at the facade where electric light burned in every window, making the house look like an ocean liner before a wreck. "And they die beautifully." "Death is rarely beautiful, Inspector." Elias ascended the wide marble steps, leaning on his cane. The tap of the ivory pommel sounded like a sentence. "It is merely quick or long. Aesthetics is the lot of poets, while you and I, Arthur, are sewage cleaners. What do we have inside?" "A circus," Blackwood spat, throwing his cigarette butt into a perfect flower bed of hydrangeas. "Servants are sobbing in the kitchen, heirs are already dividing the silver in the small drawing room, and the chief of police has sent a consultant." Elias stopped a step away from the massive oak doors with bronze lion heads. "A consultant? I thought I was your consultant." "You are an inquisitor, Thorne. You are the heavy artillery rolled out when a wall of lies needs to be breached." Blackwood lowered his voice, glancing back at the constables by the entrance. "But this is an experiment, a political order. Cross himself pressured the mayor, said it was time for the police to master progressive methods of forensics rather than rely on medieval superstitions. In short, there is a girl from the university working in the library right now." "A girl?" Elias raised an eyebrow in surprise, and the gesture was full of aristocratic skepticism. "The university does not accept women into the departments of magic. That is council law." "She is not a mage, Elias. She is, I don't even know what to call it. She calls herself a thanatochemist. Anyway, I beg you, do not kill her with your sarcasm in the first 5 minutes. I have enough problems with the press as it is." Elias merely grunted, adjusting his gloves, and pushed the heavy doors open. The hall of the mansion met them with suffocating warmth, and the smell of wax mixed with a thin note of hysteria. Groups of liveried servants huddled in corners, whispering and casting frightened glances upward toward the wide staircase, carpeted in burgundy, leading to the master's quarters. Elias's appearance caused a wave of instantaneous silence. They knew him.
They feared him. A tall figure in black, a cane, a crest with a skull. The common people, he was a harbinger of trouble, a man who speaks with the dead and knows their sins. Elias walked through the hall without looking around, but scanning the space. He felt his silencer ring on his pinky finger pulsing, not from overload, as in the docks. It vibrated from a strange, unpleasant resonance, like an itch. Here, inside the house, that same unnatural void he had sensed on the street became dense as jelly. It was wrong. A house where violence had just occurred should hum with emotions. Walls should remember the dying scream. Carpets should hold the mental imprint of horror, which to a necromancer glows brighter than spilled blood. But here, it was sterile. Absolutely, frighteningly clean. As if someone had cauterized the ether with a branding iron or wiped reality with bleach. "Second floor, to the right," Blackwood prompted, following behind and breathing heavily. The library doors were thrown wide open. It was a room worthy of a king. Walls lined with leather-bound books up to the coffered ceiling. A huge fireplace where embers glowed, heavy velvet drapes absorbing sounds. In the middle of the room, on a handmade Persian rug, lay Lord Archibald Granville. He was in a dressing gown of gold brocade, which now seemed a ridiculous shroud. His face had turned blue and was contorted in a grimace of absolute, animal terror. Eyes bulged, mouth open in a silent scream. Hands clawed, as if he had tried to push away an invisible enemy, tearing at the air. But Elias's gaze was not riveted by the corpse. Elias's gaze was riveted by a figure crawling on knees around the body, violating every conceivable protocol of magical investigation. It was a young woman. She looked no older than 25. Red hair, wild and curly, was haphazardly pulled into a knot in the back of her head, from which pencils stuck out in all directions like quills on a porcupine. She wore an outrageously ridiculous outfit. Men's trousers of rough fabric tucked into lace-up work boots, a white blouse with revolved arms and a leather apron studded with pockets, from which protruded tools of the strangest kind, from screwdrivers to forceps. "Cortisol levels are off the charts," her voice reached Elias, ringing, businesslike, and utterly devoid of reverence for death. "Traces of cyanosis, characteristic pedichy in the sclera of the eyes, asphyxia but without a strangulation furrow. The larynx is not broken. Curious. Damnably curious." Elias struck the floor with his staff. The sound was hollow, like a gunshot in an empty temple. "Step away from the body." The woman didn't flinch. She didn't even turn around. She continued to twist a knob on her device, causing it to emit a thin squeak. "Just a minute. The galvanometer shows residual electrical activity in the nerve endings. Synapses are still sparking. If I interrupt the measurement now, the data will be inaccurate, and in science there is nothing worse than incomplete data." "I don't care about your data," Elias said coldly, stepping closer and looming over her like a black shadow. "You are trampling the astral trace. You are violating the integrity of the scene for the ritual with your wires in your presence. In the name of the Royal Inquisitor, I order you to cease this farce." Finally, she raised her head. On her nose sat round goggles with thick lenses that made her brown eyes enormous and gave her the look of a mad owl. She looked up at Elias, without fear, without respect, but with a kind of cold research interest, as if he were a rare species of beetle she had long wanted to dissect. "You must be Mr. Thorne." She stood up, brushing dust from her knees. "Clara Vance, Department of Applied Thanatology and Forensic Chemistry. I read your monograph on the classification of ghosts. The chapter on poltergeists is quite poetic, though deeply unscientific." Unscientific? Elias felt irritation boiling inside. This girl dared to lecture him? "My family has studied the underside for 300 years, Miss Vance. We wrote these laws with blood and sanity, while your colleagues were treating runny noses with bloodsetting and believed the earth was flat." "Science does not stand still," she parried, beginning to coil the wires with the dexterity of a magician. "What you call the underside, we call the bioetheric field. And right now, Mr. Thorne, this etheric field is behaving anomalously." She pointed a finger stained with ink at her device. The needle on the dial trembled finely in the red zone, near the 0 mark. "See? The etheric pressure in this room is below 0.
It's a vacuum, absolute emptiness. If you try to open a channel here, you will create an implosion, a collapse of space.
Elias snorted. He walked around her, trying not to step on the scattered tools, each of which seemed to him an insult to the sacrament of death. A vacuum exists in the heads of theorists, Miss Vance. This is a classic locked room. The windows are bolted from the inside. The door was broken down by servants. Splinters are still on the carpet. The fireplace hasn't been lit for 2 days. There are no signs of physical intrusion. The killer walked through walls or materialized inside, which means this is a case for magic, not for chemistry and voltmeters. And if the killer didn't walk through walls? She asked, folding her goggles and shoving them into her apron pocket. And if he was here the whole time? In the form of what? A dust mite? In the form of gas, or a sound wave, or something that leaves no marks on the carpet but leaves traces on instruments. Look here. She picked up with tweezers a tiny, almost invisible shard of glass from the floor. This was in his robe's pocket. A shard of a medicine ampule? The Lord's heart was weak? Elias squinted, but did not take the evidence in hand. No, it's a fragment of a vacuum tube, very thin glass, the kind used in radio electronics, and there are traces of coating on it. Enough, Elias cut her off. He was tired of this lecture. Time was running out. Granville's soul, if it was still here, was fading with every minute. Blackwood. The inspector who had been leaning against the door frame all this time appeared on the threshold. Yes, Elias? Remove the civilians and this scientist. I need silence, complete, absolute. Not a single gear must squeak. Clara Vance pursed her lips. For a second, Elias thought she would hit him with her tripod, but she restrained herself. She quickly, with a clatter, gathered her things into a huge leather satchel that looked heavier than she was. Fine, your circus, your rules, she threw out, fastening the straps. But I warned you, Thorne, it's unstable here. My instruments are detecting micro-vibrations similar to the operation of a powerful induction generator. If you start pumping energy from outside, you will become a conduit. Out, Elias said, quietly but threateningly, pointing his cane at the door. Clara adjusted a stray curl, cast one last strange look at him, a mixture of pity and anger, and left, stomping loudly across the parquet with her army boots. The door, Elias commanded. Blackwood closed the library doors. The massive lock clicked. Finally, Elias was alone with the dead lord. He exhaled, trying to calm down. That girl had thrown off his fine-tuning. Bioetheric field. Dog shit. Ghosts are souls. They are memory. They are pain frozen in time. They cannot be measured by a needle. They can only be felt by the heart. He took off his top hat and placed it on an armchair, leaned his staff against the desk. Then he took a piece of chalk from his pocket. It was not simple chalk, a mixture of gypsum, bone meal, and silver powder. Let's start with protection, he muttered. Granville was an old rogue and something of an amateur mage, so extra precautions wouldn't hurt. This wasn't a nameless vagabond from the docks. This spirit could be strong and angry. He drew a perfect circle around Granville's body. The line closed. Runes flashed for a second with dull silver and went out. This was strange. Usually, runes burned with even, soft light, as long as a contour was closed, feeding off the background magic of the place. Elias frowned. He checked the lines. All correct. Maybe the chalk was damp? Or was the mansion's background really depleted? He approached the body. Granville stared at the ceiling with glassy eyes, in which the reflection of the chandelier was frozen. He removed his right glove, neatly tucking it into his pocket. The room was quiet. Too quiet. Even the ticking of the grandfather clock on the mantel seemed muffled, as if the clock were covered with a pillow. The fire in the hearth burned without crackling. Vacuum, Clara's words surfaced in his memory. To hell with it, Elias thought. I am an inquisitor. I do not submit to space. I bend it to my will. He sank to his knees right on the carpet. He took a deep breath, concentrating, and placed his bare palm on the cold, damp forehead of the dead man. Usually, at this moment, he felt a prick, the cold electric discharge of contact when two souls touch. But now he felt emptiness, as if he had placed his hand on a piece of marble or plastic. Under his palm there was nothing, no echo, no tremble, no residual heat of life. Excita a somno, he began the standard summoning formula, putting the power of his gift into the words. Loquere veritat, speak the truth. The words fell into silence like stones into a bottomless well. No response. The ether was dead. Elias tensed. He felt his gift inside. It seethed, demanding release, like water in a sealed boiler. But there was nothing for it to latch onto outside. Granville's body was locked. Or empty. Impero, Elias barked, losing patience and increasing pressure. He poured a pulse of pure will into the touch. And then the room answered. Not a ghost. The room. The walls shuddered. Books on the shelves shook, some tumbling to the floor with a rustle. The glass in the tall windows vibrated with a thin, nasty, drilling ring. Elias screamed. The pain was unbearable, as if not blood, but his very nerves were being drawn from his veins, wound onto an invisible spool. He saw with peripheral vision that the runes on the floor, drawn in chalk, had turned black and burst into flames, but not magical fire. Ordinary, orange flame. The pile of the carpet caught fire. "Fin it!" he shouted, trying to sever the mental channel. "Fin it!" Useless. He was being sucked into the vortex, into absolute hungry silence. His heart pounded irregularly. Lungs lacked air. Darkness fell over his eyes. The last thing he saw before consciousness left him was a shadow out the window. The huge mechanical shadow of the cross tower under construction, which blocked the sky and seemed to look straight at him with its single cyclopean searchlight eye. And, falling into oblivion, he realized with horror that Clara Vance had been right. It wasn't just a vacuum. It was a trap, and he had just pulled the trigger. The first thing to return was the smell. A sharp chemical stench of burning insulation mixed with a sickening reek of singed wool and ozone. It smells like this after lightning strikes a transformer box, fusing copper and plastic into a single smoking lump. Then came the pain. It wasn't localized. It pulsed in every cell of his body, as if he had been passed through a meat grinder, his bones ground into flour and then reassembled, nerve endings crudely stitched together with the wrong threads. In his ears there was a thin, continuous drilling ring, like the squeak of a dying insect. Elias tried to open his eyes. His eyelids felt laden with lead. Every attempt to lift them required a titanic effort of will. Finally, the world seeped in through a narrow slit of light. Above him floated the library ceiling. The familiar molding of chubby angels was now covered in greasy soot. One of the cherubs, the one holding a harp, had lost its head. A fresh chip gleamed white against the black smoke like an open wound. Pupils dilated, reaction to light sluggish. Nystagmus. The voice came as if from under a body of water, distorted and gurgling. Someone was shining a sharp, painful flashlight beam into his face. Elias jerked, trying to brush it away, but his arm was heavy, alien, and completely unresponsive. "Lie still, Thorne." A snap, a hiss, and a sharp smell of ammonia penetrating to the brain hit his nose, burning the mucous membrane. Elias coughed, convulsively drawing in air that was full of fumes. The world around him swayed like the deck of a ship and finally gained sharpness. He was lying on the floor. His impeccable formal frock coat was smoking, the fabric on his shoulder burned through to the shirt. Nearby, on the Persian rug, which was now a smoldering, stinking black rag, lay sharp shards of the crystal chandelier. And above him, squatting in the pose of a gargoyle, loomed Clara Vance. Her protective goggles were askew, her face smeared with soot, making her look like a miner, but in her eyes burned the cold, professional determination of a field surgeon. In her hand, she held a crushed glass ampule of smelling salts. "You," Elias rasped. His voice broke into a pathetic, senile wheeze. His throat burned. "Did you poison me?" "I resuscitated you." She briskly threw the empty ampule into her satchel.
You had respiratory arrest for 40 seconds, synaptic shock. Your heart lost its rhythm. If I hadn't smashed the window with a chair to equalize the pressure in the room, your eardrums would have burst like overripe cherries. Elias shifted his eyes. Indeed, one of the tall lancet windows was barbarically smashed. Shards of stained glass littered the floor, and the cold night wind with rain burst inside, stirring the burnt velvet drapes and blowing out the acrid smoke. He tried to sit up. His body protested with a flash of pain in his spine. Clara immediately supported his back, unexpectedly strong and agile for such a fragile-looking girl. Careful, don't make sudden movements. You might have a concussion or internal bleeding. Elias roughly pushed her hand away. He needed to check, right now. Panic, cold and sticky and slimy, was rising from his stomach to his throat, choking him stronger than the smoke. He looked at his hands. They were trembling with a fine, nasty tremor. His artifact ring, the one with black obsidian that silenced the noise, had cracked in half right on his finger. The stone hadn't just split, it had crumbled into gray dust that now stained his skin. The ruby cufflinks, poison detectors, and minor passive shields were blackened and melted, ruining his shirt cuffs. They had taken the blow. They had burned out, overloaded by a monstrous impulse so that his heart would continue to beat. But these were things. Things could be bought. Things could be fixed. Elias closed his eyes. He did what he had done every morning and every evening since he was 5. He reached out with his inner sight to the underside. It was a habitual, reflex movement of the soul, like wiggling a finger, like taking a breath, like opening eyes underwater. I am here. I listen. Ad sum. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Where before, always, even under the protection of the ring, an ocean of voices, emotions, and echoes had seethed, there was now a deaf, impenetrable concrete wall. Vacuum. Silence. He beat against this wall with his will, scratched it with mental claws, screamed soundlessly, but found no slit or crack. He didn't feel the presence of death. Lord Granville's body lay just 2 meters from him, but to Elias's senses it was now no more than a sack of cooling bones and meat. No cold, no echo, no residual memory, no trembling ghost nearby. He had become deaf, blind, ordinary. No, he whispered, and this whisper was terrible than a scream. At that moment, the library doors which Blackwood had so diligently locked from the outside flew off their hinges from a powerful kick. Police officers burst into the room with revolvers ready, their rain-wet coats glistening in the lantern light. Behind them, breathing heavily and gripping a Webley, flew the inspector himself. "Everybody stay put! Hands where I can see them!" Blackwood yelled, sweeping the barrel from side to side, searching for a threat in the shadows. "Thorne, what is going on here?" He froze, seeing the picture of total devastation. Blackened walls from which expensive wallpaper hung in tatters, destroyed furniture, books turned to ash, Lord Granville's corpse thrown into a corner by the blast wave like a broken doll, and Elias Thorne sitting in the middle of this chaos with the expression of a man who has just learned of his own death. Blackwood slowly lowered the revolver. His eyes widened. "Elias, are you intact? Who did this? Was the killer here? Did he attack you?" Elias slowly, leaning on the wreckage of an armchair, rose to his feet. His legs were like cotton and trembled like a paralytic's. Everyone was looking at him. Blackwood, constables with bulging eyes, servants crowding in the corridor, pressing hands to their mouths. Clara Vance, who was already busily rummaging in her bottomless satchel again, ignoring the barrels pointed at her. They were waiting for an answer. They were waiting for a name. The usual verdict of the Inquisitor. The killer is the butler. The killer is the ghost of a mistress. Elias opened his mouth to say the familiar, weighty, "Case closed," but the words stuck in his throat like a fishbone. He had no words. He had no truth. He looked at his hands. They were dirty with soot and obsidian dust. "I don't know." The silence in the room became tangible, heavy as a gravestone. "What do you mean, I don't know?" Blackwood stepped forward, stepping on shards of glass. The crunch sounded unnaturally loud. His face darkened. You conducted the ritual. We waited outside the door. You were in contact. What did Granville say? Granville said nothing. The ritual failed. Failed? The inspector blinked, as if Elias had started speaking Chinese. You are a Thorne. Thorns' rituals don't fail. You are necromancers, not circus magicians. There was a trap here, Clara intervened. Her voice sounded calm and sober against the backdrop of general hysteria. She walked up to Blackwood, wiping her hands with an oil-soaked rag. An etheric pit. Mr. Thorne tried to connect to a network that was under high voltage. Result, short circuit. Say thank you that he is alive, that his brain didn't boil, and that the house didn't burn down to the ground along with the whole block. Blackwood shifted his heavy gaze from Elias to Clara and back. So, he spoke slowly, comprehending the disaster. We don't know who killed Granville. We lost the main evidence, the victim's testimony, and we blew the crime scene to hell? Technically, the crime scene blew itself up, Clara clarified, adjusting her glasses. It was a defensive reaction of the absorption system. Shut up, Blackwood barked, losing his composure. He turned to Elias, and in his eyes there was no longer friendly sympathy or respect for an old colleague. There was the fear of a bureaucrat who has a dead peer of England lying on his patch, and instead of answers, smoking ruins. Elias, do you understand what this means? Tomorrow the newspapers will eat us alive. Cross will declare that old methods are dangerous, that magic is unstable. He was waiting for this failure. Cross, Elias raised his head. The name sounded in his consciousness like a gunshot. The shadow of the tower, the mechanical eye. It's his technology. I felt a hum, a mechanical steady hum before the strike. It's not magic. Do you have proof? Blackwood asked harshly, stepping close. He smelled of wet wool and cheap tobacco. Can you show me an etheric cast, the killer's aura, a recording of the mental contact, anything at all besides your feelings which just blew up the room? Elias silenced. He had nothing. His main tool, his pride, his gift was destroyed. He was empty. I thought so. Blackwood rubbed his face wearily with his palm, smearing rainwater. Go, Elias. Go home. Sleep it off. I'll write in the report that there was a gas leak, a pipe burst, a spark. It happens. You're suspending me? Elias's voice was quiet. I'm saving your hide, you idiot. If I write the truth, that you lost control of your gift and caused a magical explosion in central London, you'll be stripped of your license the same day. You'll be sent for mandatory treatment to Bedlam, to the ward for violent mages. Get out of here. Out of my sight. This was a humiliation comparable to a public flogging in the square. Elias straightened up, gathering the remnants of family dignity, pulling a mask of arrogance over a face distorted by pain. He reached for his staff. The bog oak staff, with a dragon vein inside, lay by the fireplace. It was split in two along the grain. Charred splinters stuck out in all directions like broken ribs. The magical vein, once pulsing with life, had burned to ash, leaving only a great track of cinder inside. Elias froze, looking at the wreckage. The staff was a part of himself, a gift from his father for his coming of age, an extension of his hand. Can it be fixed? He asked quietly, addressing no one in particular, with a childish confusion in his voice. Clara walked over and picked up the pieces. She examined the cut of the wood, smelled the ash. The structure is destroyed at molecular level, she said softly, without her usual sarcasm. In her voice sounded the sincere regret of a master seeing a broken, unique instrument. I'm sorry, Thorne, it's firewood. She held the pieces to him. Elias took them. The wood was warm, but dead. Just sticks, heavy, useless pieces of wood. Go, Elias, repeated Blackwood, turning away to his men. Sergeant, cordon the perimeter, let no one in, especially reporters, and find me a damn gas man. Elias slowly turned and trudged toward the exit. Each step was difficult. His legs felt like cast iron. He walked through the line of constables, feeling their gazes on him, a mixture of pity, gloating, and fear. The great Thorne has fallen, the sorcerer deflated, Aquila missed.
At the hall doors, the stomp of heavy boots caught up with him. Hey, whispered Clara, grabbing his sleeve. Elias jerked his arm sharply, breaking free. "Leave me alone. You got your triumph, Miss Vance. Science won. Magic proved powerless and dangerous. You can write your article for the scientific journal. Get a grant." "Don't be an idiot," she snorted, and unceremoniously shoved a hand into the pocket of her soot-stained apron. "While you were playing a living lightning rod, I examined the floor where the killer stood, before everything caught fire. I made it in time." She unclenched her fist. On her palm, in a smudge of black soot, lay a small metal object, a gear wheel. Not from a watch, the teeth were too large and predatory. Not from a lock. It was dark, heavy metal, resembling tungsten. But the strangest thing was not the shape. "Look at the teeth," Clara said, bringing the gear to his face, forcing him to focus his gaze. "See this residue? Reddish and greasy?" "Rust?" asked Elias indifferently. He wanted to leave, to hide, to get drunk until oblivion. "It's lubricant," Clara shook her head. Eyes behind the lenses of her glasses shone with excitement. "A specific compound based on whale fat, graphite, and coal dust. This is used only in conditions of high humidity and heavy pollution, in port cranes, or in the heavy industrial machines of Smog City." Elias slowly raised his gaze to her. A semblance of interest flickered in his empty eyes. "So what?" "Lord Granville was an aesthete and a snob. There isn't a single machine in his house more complex than a music box or a cuckoo clock. This part isn't from here. It is alien to this place, just as I am. It fell out of the killer's pocket, or out of the killer himself when he moved." She placed the gear in Elias's palm and squeezed his fingers with her warm, rough hand. The metal was cold, sharp, and unpleasant. "Your ghost was silent, Thorne. He fled or was destroyed. But matter speaks. Matter always leaves clues. The killer came from Cross's domain, and if you want to restore your reputation, and perhaps understand what happened to your head, you will have to stop listening to the dead and start looking under your feet, at the evidence." Elias squeezed the gear. The sharp edges bit into the skin of his palm, causing sobering pain. "Why are you helping me?" he asked quietly. "I was rude to you. I kicked you out. I personify everything you technocrats despise." Clara adjusted her glasses, which had slipped down her snub nose again. "Because my device showed an anomaly I can't explain, and I hate unsolved equations. And because," she hesitated for a second, her face becoming serious, "because I saw your eyes when you realized you lost a gift. It's terrifying, Thorne. It's like seeing a man buried alive. No one should be alone in such silence." She turned abruptly and walked back into the wrecked library, loudly commanding the constables not to trample the ash and not to touch her tools. Elias remained standing in the corridor. In one hand, he clutched the useless wreckage of his staff. In the other, the dirty, greasy gear. Emptiness rang in his head. But somewhere there, deep in this icy void, a spark was born. Not of magic, of anger. Cold, calculating rage. Cross. This name now pulsed in his temples instead of a heart. Elias hid the gear in his pocket, where artifacts used to lie. He adjusted the collar of his burnt frock coat, straightened his back, as much as the pain allowed, and walked out of the house into the pouring London rain. Grandy, his coachman, was dozing on the box, covered with a rubberized cloak. "Home, sir?" he asked, rousing himself and seeing the master's state. "Lord have mercy! You look as if you fought a bear in a burning forest." "To the library," Elias replied, hoarsely but firmly, climbing into the cab with difficulty. Every movement echoed with pain. "To the public library, Grandy." "To the library, sir? It's night outside, and you always said they write lies in books. I need books on mechanics, schematics, automaton blueprints, and let's stop by the wine merchant. I need all the brandy he has left." "Mechanics, sir? But you hate nuts and bolts. You said it was vulgar iron." "Times change," Elias slammed the door, cutting himself off from the police stairs. "Adapt or die. I do not intend to die." The cab moved off, wheels clattering on the wet cobblestones. Elias pressed his forehead against the cold glass. The silence inside was terrible, deafening. But now this silence had a purpose. He would find the one who turned off the light, who stole his life.
And if for that he had to dirty his hands in machine oil, learn to turn nuts, and work with that unbearable girl, so be it.